Hello, everybody, and welcome to this podcast, Building for Peace with Hannah Jewell, focused on food sovereignty and healthcare and our transitional times that we're living in. Today, we have Sarmado Sibley with us. He's a raw food chef extraordinaire. He's got a fascinating story and some really interesting ways of thinking about healthcare, food, and diet. Welcome, Sarmado, to the podcast.
Hi there, Hannah. Nice to see you again. Thank you for the invitation.
You're so welcome. Sarmado, let's just start with a brief introduction of who you are in this moment and your relationship with food. And then we'll kind of go back and learn how you got to that place.
Beautiful. Thank you. So in this moment, I'm currently living in Somerset and connecting with a lot of local growers and producers, suppliers of food that comes from the local area, at least the artisans or the people that are kind of leading the change in so basically keeping the heirloom seeds that our ancestors used, particularly in this area, so that we can thrive on a food level within our local community without without some of the systems we've been dependent on. So my focus has been on working with a few clients and projects in the local area. And primarily it's all plant-based food. It's plant-based and it's organic or biodynamic. It's respecting nature, and it's basically creating food that has a reverence for the land that it comes from as well.
Uh-huh. Yeah, food that has a reverence is an entirely new way of thinking. Because the farmers have been growing food for generations, and they're also concerned about our dependency on current systems and how to get beyond that. But moving one step further into reverence for the food is not something all of them are in agreement on or cohesion about at the moment. So let's unpack that a little bit, because you obviously came to this place of reverence through a journey.
Yes.
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 So let's start when you're a teenager and you're interested in chefing. Let's begin there. Tell us a
Good
little bit
call.
about that.
Good call. Yeah. So it's kind of following on from the last, what you just last said, the reverence for the food. Because as a teenager, I remember actually being in a home economics class at school. So I was taught how to cook at school. And everything back then, it was in the early 80s. And in Europe, it was all focused around Nouvelle cuisine. So it was this new way of eating, which was all about making something beautiful on the plate and the design and the style of everything. Because here in the UK, prior to that time, um, there wasn't much excitement in the world of food. Um, and so back then, it was all about creating beautiful food from ingredients. And now it's kind of going full circle where there is more reverence for the ingredient. Because back in those days, as a teenager at school, learning how to cook, my teacher at the time came up and she said to me, "You're going to leave school. There's an opportunity when you do leave school, if you wanted to do an apprenticeship at a local restaurant and hotel, which at the time was in the top 5 in the UK. It had a Michelin Star." And I remember going there and just my mind was completely blown. Reverence was not, it was kind of happening, but not happening, because back in those days, we were flying food in from all over the world. The potatoes came from Paris, the carrots came from the south of France. We had ingredients coming from Italy, and they were flown in every week. And we were using the best possible produce. So my early days of the career were focused around the Michelin Star restaurants. and um, that kind of environment. So it was very fast paced. It was very pressured. Um, it was all about precision. The food looked amazing, and that was the kind of foundation for the career.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, you were using the best possible produce and creating beautiful designs, which does have an element of spirit and heart to it.
Mhm.
But I recall from earlier conversations us talking also about how much butter and salt and sugar was in that food. And I believe that the combination of these dietary parts of such a rich diet and the hours of stress and things then led to a skin issue for yourself. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah, it's good. Thanks for the reminder, Hannah. It was absolutely what happened. You know, I was 18 at the time, working in those Michelin Star kitchens, or kitchen at the time, and 18 years old, we were doing 16 to 18-hour days. That was 5 days a week. There was one day where I was going to college, so that was effectively 6 days a week. You're working in a high pressured environment where every plate had to look exactly the same, regardless of where the delivery had turned up. You had half the team of staff, and the fact that most of the people that I was working with at the time were using a lot of drugs and alcohol in the kitchen whilst they were working, funnily enough. So there was a tremendous amount of stress and pressure. And then you mentioned the butter, the sugar, the dairy, the meat, the wheat, those kind of ingredients. I then learned later on, I think perhaps when I was 35, how they actually work in the body. But I was consuming all of those things, plus the stress. And so I developed a extreme case of eczema at 18 years old. It was kind of head to toe. Um, and I was having to use a lot of steroid creams, antibiotics, and pharmaceuticals to kind of get better, or at least apply some of those ingredients topically to my skin so that it would alleviate the suffering that I was going through. But I remember seeing specialists at the time who said to me at 18, that's it. I think you're going to have to leave the kitchens. It's not the environment, because of the infection you'll get within your skin, because of you know, the heat, basically. And they're dirty places, kitchens.
So, how did you find a solution to that? I mean, you're young, this is your passion, you have had a great opportunity in a Michelin
Mm.
star restaurant. Maybe you feel like your career is going to take off, and then bam, your skin. Now, how
Yeah.
did you work around that?
Yeah. I mean, at the time, I remember I was seeing a specialist in Sussex who was a skin specialist at a private hospital. Um, and her approach was an allopathic approach
Mhm.
to healing. So it was using pharmaceuticals. And those pharmaceuticals were steroid creams, antibiotics, uh, steroid creams on the skin to apply topically. I was taking salt baths in the evening. I was applying these thick ointments to the skin during the day upon waking. Before I used to go to sleep at night, my mum would bandage me from head to toe so that I couldn't touch my skin when I was sleeping. And I had my hands and legs tied together so that I wouldn't irritate myself when I was asleep. So they were really extreme conditions. And even that, I remember not working. I mean, there were long periods of time I had to take away from the kitchen and be off work. Um, Luckily, the hotel that I was working at the time, they allowed me to work in the garden rather than the kitchen, so that I could be in the fresh air, working more regular hours and not in a stressful environment. That really did help.
Mm.
But the pharmaceuticals I was applying to the skin, they weren't, because it was just something that you were putting over the top of the skin. What was happening underneath and inside was still like a volcano. Everything was still coming to the surface. Um, So I did that for a while, and then I went to see a Chinese doctor in London, and then I was taking a lot of Chinese medicine for a while, um, which helped. And slowly it started to disappear. But then I think it was probably about 4 years, then there was another eruption that came up. So it kind of went down, you kind of suppressed it, and then it came back, and it went down. But the foods, I later learned, were a massive player in that.
So the foods were contributing to what was happening inside to that volcano that wanted to erupt.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the Chinese medicine helped that, but then it's like maybe there were some deeper layers and you had to stop the irritants.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, how did you learn about what these foods do? And tell us a little bit about what they do, the wheat, the meat, the butter, the sugar.
yeah,
Yeah, how do
yeah.
they work?
Yeah, it's fascinating because what happened was between that age of that first breakout of the skin, which was 18, I think probably about every 4 years it would come back again. And there was nothing specific I could say, oh, well, it was this pill or it was this tincture or it was this treatment, but it would keep coming back. And then what happened was I'd had a bad eruption of it in my 30s, mid 30s, and that subsided again. And I then went to India when I was 35.
Mm.
And I met a lady who then became my first teacher, sorry, who introduced me to meditation, which I'd never practiced ever before. So that experience, I was able to sit with the feelings and I was able to sit with the emotions and become aware, not overnight, but over time, of some of the patterns that I played out or some of the things which I just suppressed and tried to carry on with that were not serving me, that I pushed down through using certain foods.
Okay.
So it was quite a long process because I'm still learning that whole issue around the skin. Because fast forward 2 years later, after meeting the first meditation teacher, I'd found myself in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur, staying in a hotel, and I could feel that the skin was about to come up again. Ironically, after avoiding these foods for quite some time, and on the hotel bed was a newspaper, and on that newspaper, on the front cover, there was one of the world's top skin specialists coming to Kuala Lumpur to do a talk at a hotel.
Mm.
Um, and I had no intention of spending my day on a 2-day skin conference in Kuala Lumpur, but it's what happened. And I think out of those 2 days, one of the biggest things I learned in that period was that that specialist said sometimes when the skin erupts, it's because you have inherited a pattern that is not yours, maybe from the parents or from the ancestors, or a way of living that is not best suited to you.
Yes.
So there was more unpacking to do. And in answer to your question around how wheat and sugar and dairy and meat, how they work in the body, when I'd met that first meditation teacher in 2005, alongside that meditation practice, I started training in Ayurveda. And I'd never thought of food as being medicine. Food was just something you did because you were hungry.
Uh-huh.
Um, and so that was a big eureka moment for me because I realized that every ingredient can determine your experience. So in that practice of Ayurveda, I was learning how things like flour works in the body.
Mm.
When you combine white wheat flour with water, let's say, and yeast to make a bread, that not only lines the gut, which can suppress emotion, and can contribute to depression, but it also works like an opiate on the brain.
Yep.
White wheat activates the same receptors in the brain that you would find from opium.
No
So,
way.
so it's very sedative. It's very, it could almost knock you out. It works in exactly the same way.
Mhm.
So that is an addiction in itself when you understand that, because when you walk past these patisseries in France or these beautiful places in Italy that are making the pastries in the morning, those smells that come out of that cafe, they set off receptors in the brain. The smell sets off that trigger that says, I need that. And then you take that food and then it pushes everything down.
So it pushes down the emotions. It gives you a temporary subtle feeling of sedation.
Yeah.
And then your brain says, that was good. Let's do it again.
Yeah. Yeah. And meanwhile, the way that that's responding in the body afterwards, if you combine that white flour with sugar and fat, let's say butter or cream, which is what we were using in those Michelin Star restaurants. I mean, pallets of it we were using. Is that those ingredients actually create like a fire in the body?
Mhm.
So you've got your opiate or your white flour product going in your body. So that kind of sedates you, that pushes the emotion down and pacifies you. And then you've got the sugar and the fat coming in, which wakes up that fire inside, which is firing up that emotion. But you're so sedated, it can't come out and it can't express itself from anywhere. So the body's largest organ is the skin, and then hey presto, it's straight onto the skin surface.
Oh my goodness. Because I've heard about acne being linked to dairy and sugar and observed that in the teenagers around me and myself as a young person. And that explains it too, the fire in the body just needing a way to release itself.
Mm.
Uh,
Yeah. And it's a constant learning, Hannah, because it wasn't so long ago, perhaps in the past 2, 3 years, somebody had recommended that the best thing when the skin condition comes up is actually, yes, one, avoid those food items, but number two, actually look at the liver and start cleansing the liver, because in Chinese medicine, the liver is the seat of the emotion. And if you can cleanse any toxicity that's in the liver, then that will also help your skin stay bright, alive,
yeah.
clean.
This really hits a personal note for me because I had a skin issue that erupted at a period of great stress about 6 years ago now,
Mhm.
6 or 7 years ago. And I ended up going on a really restricted diet while I figured out what was irritating me. But more importantly, there was so much emotion to actually be present with. And the liver, as the conduit for that emotion, became really apparent. The way we inherit emotional patterns and our responses to life is passed down through the organs, was my discovery. The womb carries a lot, we get imprinted, and the liver carries a lot, especially for anyone who's had a history of addiction in their family.
Wow.
um, the liver, the alcohol's been used sort of like that opiate of the white flour to calm those emotions that had no place to go and to provide a way for them to at least move out so the liver's not overly congested so that you don't actually keel over and die.
Wow.
Or emotions that aren't dealt with, that alcohol can actually be a self-corrective measure at one stage because it's moving emotion. Ideally, we then need to deal with the emotion or we get further later effects. So in every generation, there's somebody who can say, no, I will deal with this emotion now and these patterns and go ahead and do the long years of work it takes with the diet and the inner inquiry to make a change here. So For me, it took about 4 years to completely heal that skin, to about 2 years to get some relief. And then it's been a really slow process of reintroducing foods and observing myself and observing how I feel, what I think, how I'm behaving when I'm eating different foods. It's fascinating.
Wow. Wow. That's beautiful.
Yeah,
Yeah. Because most often around the food, there's not the awareness because we're using it to fill a hole.
exactly. And when we cut out a lot and then reintroduce it really slowly, we have the opportunity to bring awareness to
Hmm.
how it interacts with us.
Yeah. 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 One of the teachers uh, once said to me, he said, never eat with emotion,
Um,
never cook with emotion. So if ever there's the fear, the anger, or the sadness coming, to avoid both eating, because you're going to consume the emotion and you're going to push it down, best you wait until the emotion is clear. And the same also goes for the cooking, because if you're preparing those foods in that kind of very stressed, angry, pressured space, that is also going to go into the food. But that's not something that we understand in a Western lifestyle. But it is something that you see practiced in Southeast Asia for sure, because often when foods are prepared, there's, back to what we shared before, there's reverence, there's prayer, there's mantra, there's intention. And when that comes through, you don't need quantities of food. You have small amounts because then you're consuming frequency. That gives you everything you need.
huh. Yeah, you have small amounts of mantra and love and intention along with the mineral content,
Mm-hmm.
and it just fuels you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and food becomes more about fuel than about emotion. I think a lot of us eat. I'm fasting right now for Ramadan, and it's a wonderful process. I really, really love it because it just is one time of the year when I notice how unconsciously I deal with emotion by making a cup of tea. Just do it all the time. And when you take that away, then the emotions aren't necessarily terrible things, but you go, oh yeah, I can see that this is my habit.
Mm.
And the fasting really just brings another level of awareness to how we interact, providing an opportunity for reverence to grow. So
Beautiful.
that's my experience is we need a way for the reverence to show itself within us. Otherwise, it may be hard to encounter.
Mm.
Um,
Beautiful. Yeah, I like that. Mm.
How did your journey into the raw food diet begin? Because that's a whole nother step and level, just going away from some of the heavy foods into Ayurveda and thinking about preparation and the sattva of being in the kitchen. It's really amazing step, and that could be just enough. But then you've gone a whole nother thing and gone into this raw food level and then the local level. So let's jump to the raw food now.
Cool. Cool. All right. Well, that's a good one because I was actually living in India at the time in 2007, and I was practicing lots of meditation there, and I was eating the Ayurvedic foods. Um, and actually, I had a friend who also introduced me to different practices. And he, at the time, I think he was in, yeah, kind of late 70s. Um, and he'd invited me to his apartment, and his apartment had, you know, these great big lemongrass plants on the roof of his apartment, and he was fermenting lots of food in the kitchen. But the thing that got me the most was he looked incredible. You know, late 70s, he had a vitality. a vibrancy. His eyes were clear, his skin was bright, um, and he just had that effervescence of a teenager. You know, he was very positive, and we got into this conversation. I said, "So, what exactly are you doing right now?" And he said, "Well, funny enough, I've just come back from Thailand. I've just done a raw food cleanse." So I was, kind of, "Well, what's all that? How does that work? What did you eat and what did you do?" And he went through the protocol of what he was doing. And he said, "Look, I'll just give you the details. And then perhaps when you're there, you can check it out." Um, so the following month, I had to go to Thailand because I needed to renew the visa to be living in India. So as I went over there, I booked into this retreat center that Sacham had gone to. And it was absolutely mind blowing because it was just like, oh my God, there's no dairy, there's no sugar, there's no wheat. I remember being a bit nervous about the whole thing. I was sitting in their garden and I asked for the menu because I thought, what on earth are they going to eat?
A bunch of
And
sprouts.
yeah, I was like, you can't just do salads for a week. Um, but I looked at this menu and they had things like tortillas and pizzas and tacos and different hummuses, and they had cakes and smoothies and juices. And I was just watching these girls bringing out all of the food, and it looked incredible because it was bright and it was vibrant and it was colorful. And I was like, wow. Um, and you can make all of those things without all of those ingredients. Um, so, long story short, I booked myself on a 3-day cleanse there, which involved only eating raw foods, juices, reflexology, Thai massage, and colonics.
Uh-huh.
So basically, you were cleansing the body through juicing, filtered water, eating twice a day, only the raw foods. And I felt absolutely amazing.
Mm.
Um, the vitality came back. I felt more supple. My skin looked really bright. My headspace was very good because I was clear thinking, and I just felt excited. I felt absolutely excited about life because all of these ideas were kind of popping and the creativity was coming back.
Mm.
Um, and I can't remember the last time I'd had that. But because I was in that space, what some could call a high vibrational space or an electrified space, I was also looking at other people that were doing or following that lifestyle and finding teachers and professionals and businesses that were advocating that. And it was really, really exciting
Yeah.
because I think my food background up until that point had started to get a bit stuck. And I wasn't feeling rejuvenated around it anymore. It wasn't lighting me up in the same way. So when I saw this and actually jumped in and started experiencing it, was like, oh my God, this is a whole other universe.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Wow. When creativity opens like that and the energy is released, it feels amazing. And I'm just going to ask the questions everyone asks about raw food diets. I tried it once for a year, and
Uh-huh.
the first 6 months I loved it. I also felt a great increase in my energy. But I was living in London at the time, and I found that I was feeling too wafty and not grounded enough, and the winter, and my body felt damp, and it was hard to warm up. So I went ahead and stopped that experiment at the time. I might be willing to try it again, but the changes in my consciousness were incredible from that experience, the way I related to food. and the reciprocity that came with all living beings and not ingesting any animal products at all. I began to really feel the aliveness and the communication of the food I was eating, as well as the trees and the flowers around me, and the birds, the cats. So I'm curious about how one might sustain a raw food diet, and how that works on a long-term level. So, like, how does it work? Don't you get tired of eating lettuce?
Yeah. It's a really good question because, this is what everybody asks. Um, so there's many aspects to it. I think what you shared before, Hannah, that your consciousness expands on a level that's unimaginable because you feel that interconnectedness between all beings, within everything. But to sustain it for a long period of time is not the easiest thing, particularly if you live in the Western Hemisphere. If you're living in the UK or Europe, Northern Europe, where you have damp, cold winters, perhaps it's not the best thing, because as I learned later on in Chinese medicine, you are eating a lot of cold, damp foods. There's a lot of liquid in a raw food diet because you're consuming living food, fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, salads. I was actually in Thailand and in Australia where I had the longest periods of being raw, also Bali. Um, so you've got the tropical food, you've got the warm sunshine, um, and you feel amazing.
Yeah.
But to do it here in Europe is not so easy. So I'm not raw vegan at this moment, but it's something that I have done for a period of time and it benefited me greatly. And you can always dip back into it. And so you were sharing about doing the fasting for Ramadan. The same you could apply to the raw vegan is you could do that at any point during the year. And for some people, it's good to do it with a particular desire or goal. Maybe I'm feeling a bit foggy headed and I've got to focus, or maybe I need a little bit more energy, or maybe I want to lose some more weight. And you do it for a shorter period of time. But to do it for a long time, it's probably easier now in the UK to do it than it was, you know, 16 years ago, just because of the availability of products and produce here is much faster than it was before. But I would also recommend seeing a professional, somebody that's maintained that, because you do need specific supplementation to support it. You do need to follow certain protocols. And for doing it in London, I also find that doing raw vegan, you're so connected and so meditative and so still. And it's like, wow. But you can be really, really spaced out. And if you're doing that in a city, you need to also have grounding foods that anchor you into the earth, that help you put your feet firmly on the ground so that you can actually follow through on the steps that you're getting the realizations on, or the creativity on. Because otherwise you can, it's so easy to be spaced out.
Yeah, we did mention this in a previous conversation, the creativity coming, but needing the grounding to follow it through and action those inspirations into full manifestation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Getting to float through all the time.
Because in the beginning as well, back in 2007, when the raw vegan movement was really big, especially here in the UK, it was vilified within that community to eat anything that was cooked,
Uh-huh,
that cooked food was the enemy,
uh-huh.
and that to really be pure, to really get the best results from a raw vegan diet, you needed to be 100%. And these are the foods that you eat. But actually, as things progressed, you actually learned that by having a small amount of certain foods that are cooked, they would help ground that person to have that, maybe you do your cleansing for 3 days, 7 days through raw vegan, and then slowly introduce some cooked foods that are also plant-based, but
Mm,
they help you stay connected to the earth.
mm.
um, because there's certain constitutions that people would not thrive by eating those foods.
Yeah,
They need certain minerals. So you do need that support of a professional, I think.
yeah. Yeah, at least at this stage where we're not very connected yet. In another 20 years, 30, maybe things might be a little different.
Mm-hmm.
Um, do you chef right now? Are you still in the food industry? Like,
100%. Yeah.
yeah. What does that look like for you these days?
I think it's quite exciting. It's quite exciting because it's fast moving, it's fast paced. There's always something new, a discovery or a product, or I mean, it lights me up. I know that that is what I am here to do. You know, to use food as medicine is always so enriching, just for myself and for the clients that I work with. So I teach one-to-ones. um, I run workshops. I've recently provided the plant-based food for a couple of retreats, a meditation retreat and a breathwork retreat. I'm working on a project here in Glastonbury, which is a community. Well, I say community, but it's a project which will benefit the local community, which is all plant-based and organic. Beautiful drinks and food that people can get when they take a walk on the sacred site of the tour, and then to branch off into a delivery and other things from that. So I'm fully engaged in that and enjoying that process, because through, again, anchoring and grounding that project, I'm also having amazing connections and conversations with people in this local area. And then you learn what is most needed, because you may have this great vision of, okay, well, I want to make this business happen, and these are the steps that we need to go through. But actually, the more you spend time around here, you realize what would actually really benefit the people here, what would actually really support them to thrive. So it's like kind of molding yourself um, into a space where you are saying, this is what we're offering, but everybody gets to thrive through the food. So it's multifaceted, Hannah. um, I've got a company maybe 25 minutes away from here. They're growing medicinal mushrooms,
Uh,
which they turn into tinctures, which we also put into the chocolates and the drinks that we provide. um, there's another company, and they're not too far away from here. They're using heritage grains. So we're going to be using those to make plant-based cookies and breads and things. Um, yeah,
yeah.
there's so many lovely, exciting things.
Yeah, this everybody wins and we work together
Yeah.
is really part of the growing blossoming Aquarian age as I feel it. Just this really willingness to be community and to want to work together, and the ideas of competition slowly falling away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Which is good.
Yeah, really good. We had enough.
It's really good.
We really did. Yeah.
I never really got that, is that it, because it was really like, how can we do this together? Come on, let's just do it together. Because it's not a good, that old paradigm or that old experience. It's not good. It doesn't make us feel at ease. you know
Yes, and the feeling at ease is important to the health. these things are so intertwined. The emotion, the at ease, the reverence, the reciprocity for food and for each other, and
Yeah.
taking the time to have those conversations and actually figure out what is needed by the other person in front of you and the community that you're in. And then there's another element I want to bring in today, which is the mineral content of food. And because, okay, the whole vegan movement did get really big around 2007. And a lot of my friends tried it right away. And they were living on cucumbers and being like
Yeah.
rebels if they drank a cup of miso, you know?
Yeah.
And then I had others who went vegan, but they were living on like puffy pretzels, German style anti pretzels, and Coca-Cola.
Oh,
You know,
oh, yeah.
because they were doing it for animal rights or some other thing, and they weren't interested in the mineral content. And then years down the road, that leads to other diseases,
Mm.
obesity and things. So the mineral content is also an important aspect. And what's your relationship to that in terms of the food you put on to your plate, the food that you're serving in your businesses and your project, and the food that we as a collective are consuming?
Yeah. Thank you. That's a really vast kind of opening into food currently and the mineral content of it, because, and I think it's really important because there has been in the past few years a really big push on a vegan or plant-based diet or movement. um, I have a lot of mixed feelings around that. I mean, I know that that's where that was a direction that I was going in with my work, because suddenly, from being a pastry chef in a Michelin star restaurant using all of the butter and the sugar, I could then replicate something that was a million times better, but not using any of those ingredients. And I
Yeah.
still do, um, because there is a way that you can use certain ingredients to make them bioavailable and healthier and more mineral and enzyme rich by adding certain things in. So that could be fermentation or adding particular supplements or ingredients to those recipes to enhance the experience, to enhance uh, the mineral density of those foods. That's one aspect of it. But what's happened is, over the years, intensive farming. It's basically that a crop is grown, and as soon as that crop's grown, it gets taken out of the soil. Then the next crop goes in, that crop goes out, and goes on year after year. But what does or has not happened is that that soil then gets remineralized after each crop, so that you're preserving the biodiversity of the soil and respecting it as something that is rich, something that is life affirming, rather than just, pillaging that earth and taking from it without giving back. So any gardener or, you know, farmer that works biodynamically or organically understands that relationship. You don't take something without giving back.
Mm.
So we can learn a lot from that process. So if you're going to be eating any kind of diet at the moment, whatever that is, our foods are not going to be as mineral, enzyme rich as before, because over time, soils have got depleted, foods got depleted. So perhaps in some instances, we need to supplement the diet to get what we need from that food item. They gave an example, not well, it was quite a few years ago, of a regular carrot and a biodynamic carrot. And the biodynamic carrot had, I think it was probably about 10 times more minerals and vitamins than the regular carrot. Of course, this one costs more, but you're going to be getting more nutrition out of this one carrot than you would of the conventional.
Right.
because a lot of food that's grown in supermarkets or for supermarkets is grown hydroponically or in greenhouses. You know, it hasn't seen soil, which is a bit hard to get your head around, but sometimes it doesn't see soil, it doesn't get the nutrients from the earth, it doesn't get natural sunlight because it's all artificial lighting and certain chemicals given. Um, so, you know, for us to upgrade, let's say, our nutrition and our well-being, we need to be sourcing food that isn't so intensively grown. And biodynamic is a great way. I mean, we're lucky. I mean, in Sussex, there's a farm called Plorhatch as an example, which is wonderful, but that's not always accessible for people.
Mm.
But you can take certain ingredients and work with certain supplements to maximize the potency of those ingredients. And again, it's less is more, because
Yeah,
the reason we're eating more food is because it's nutrient deficient.
right.
So then the cost of our food bills goes up because we actually think we need more food. Well, we don't. It's actually the brain or the stomach telling the brain that it needs certain minerals to feel satiated. So when
Right.
you know, maybe you want more magnesium, but you're going for more biscuits and more chocolate. No, you just need magnesium rich food and you won't get that craving.
Yeah. Yeah, how does the average person begin to work with this? Because like Plahatch is not so far from me,
Mm,
but it is far
yeah,
enough that I'm actually not going to drive there to get my groceries.
of
It's
course.
just a bit
Yeah,
too out of reach, and then its prices are a bit more than I could manage, which is the case for a
yeah,
lot of people.
yeah.
So I can grow a little bit of food on my patio here in Brighton. I just planted spinach and beans yesterday.
Beautiful,
Yeah,
beautiful. Nice.
it's not enough to totally feed me, but I chose those because they'll be more iron and mineral rich, which will be good for my constitution.
Mhm.
So that's
Yeah,
like a small thing that I could do, but what else can we do? Like, how can we begin to make some changes towards satisfying those mineral needs, towards opening avenues for reverence and reciprocity with our food?
yeah, yeah. I think now there's quite a few things happening. So farmers markets are a big one. So wherever you are, let's say, I mean, we're speaking in the UK today, but maybe just do a search and have a look and find out where your nearest farmers market is. That's a really good start.
Mm.
Um, Try and see how you can get involved in any kind of community events. You know, it can pop up in the most unexpected places, whether it's a yoga or meditation class and the conversation afterwards,
Right.
or an invitation to a dinner. You know, maybe research if there's any workshops or classes in plant-based food in your local area or plant-based recipes. Um, have a look, see if there's any plant-based restaurants or cafes or plant-based businesses.
Mhm.
It's a bit like when I did the raw vegan. I didn't know anything about it when I was in Thailand, but as soon as I took one step towards that raw vegan, suddenly there's a business, there's a teacher, there's a workshop, there's a class, there's a retreat center. And it was like, oh my God, there's a whole universe out there.
Yeah.
And so just that one step, because there will be, I'm sure, unless you're living in central London, there will be growers and producers. But I say that even in central London, you've got people with allotments. Maybe have a look and see if there's allotments in your area. And you can always take a walk around an allotment. There'll be people there. You
Yeah.
can have a chat, see if there's any old fashioned fruit and vegetable shops. But the key thing I think is to try and steer away from the supermarkets.
Yeah.
That's the number one. Um, because most often with fruit and vegetables, a lot of their product is picked and packed when it's unripe,
Mm.
and then it's distributed and stored, and that's not in peak performance. And actually, Supermarket produce, everybody thinks it's cheap, and it's not.
Mm.
Once you start talking to people that grow their own food,
Mm.
it's actually quite cheap. It's just the time that it takes, and if you've got the space. Um, but I know that there's many allotments where you can go and meet people and talk. It all happens over food. Conversations happen around food.
Food. Well, when we eat, it sort of brings us to, because we need to go into rest and digest, and the parasympathetic nervous system gets triggered. Too many people are eating while walking and eating on the go, and that is such a mixed message. But when we gather and we eat, we allow our parasympathetic nervous system to relax.
Yeah.
And then we're in a place where we're open to communication.
Mm,
You're right. Good communication can and does happen over food. That's why we go out to eat, to celebrate things and
yeah.
to meet friends. So why not move those conversations directly to the allotment instead of the coffee shop? Not that
Yeah.
coffee shop conversations are bad. There's more variety possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can even invite, I mean, I saw somebody, it was a group not long ago, and they were suggesting inviting people to your home and start hosting people. Just cook, and have conversations around your own home dinner table. You know, that's a really good thing, you know, because food is and will ever be an increasing hot topic, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes I think what is the next generation of children going to be able to eat? All these food intolerances because the food is saturated with chemicals or hybridized, unable to reproduce itself. What's going to be left for them? You know?
Yeah. 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 It's
Yeah.
so true. Um, because going back on something you said before, Hannah, the plant-based and the vegan movement that's really taken off. It's like I see a lot of people eating processed and packaged food. It's processed and packaged food. That's not food. And you look at the ingredients on the back, and I can imagine that most of those I won't see growing outside in a field. They've come from a lab. So, you know, how are you going to be if you consume those for the next 5 years? You don't know.
Right.
The more natural and unprocessed food, which is what you find people in certain states in the world where you find the centenarians, those that live the longest, they're eating foods from their local environment that are minimally processed and grown with love and respect for the earth. They live the longest.
Yeah. Yeah, they do. And they don't eat a really complicated diet either, but or a huge amount, but the foods they eating are mineral rich and they do have a connection with them.
Yeah, yeah. And they do things together. They grow together, they eat together. That plays a really big part because our culture and our society, it has gone in a direction which is all about isolation and the individual,
Yeah.
and that's not health. That's not the way. And when we do these things together, which is that classical image of the Mediterranean dining table with all the generations of the family,
Mm.
or even if we're on retreat and we're sharing with the other guests there, you know, you feel good, you feel alive. Food works differently in the body when it's consumed together.
Well, from a teenager's journey into their inspiration into we all need to eat together and get out of the supermarkets and just experiment. I feel like I've really received from you today permission to experiment. Try Ayurvedic diet for 6 months a year. Try a raw food diet. In fact, maybe create a system of cycling through things. Just pay attention to to how you feel.
Mhm. Just
Um,
experiment. Just have
yeah,
fun.
exactly. And get a little bit of professional help. Now that's maybe the last question I can ask you, because there are people with degrees in nutrition, but they're not talking about the kind of thing we're talking. I studied nutrition a bit as an undergrad myself, and getting the fat, protein, carbohydrate balance right. That's all, those are all good considerations, but the conversation around minerals, supplementation, and supporting your specific constitution.
Mhm.
Where might a person receive support from on those kinds of topics? Like, what kinds of practitioners deal with those things?
That's a really good question, because a lot of the time I've found some information when I've been on retreats or I've gone away to do a detox, because there'll be a collection of books there. And there'll also probably be a lot of people on that retreat or experience that have their own practitioners that they see, um, for their health. But, you know, nutrition as a subject, as a subject to study is really valuable, but it's not a generic one size fits all, because it's like the raw vegan diet, let's say. Um, when you spoke about that and feeling a bit spaced out, somebody will absolutely thrive in that space, and for others, they will not thrive in that space. So, in answer to your question, Hannah, I think that um, I mean, it's a lot of self experimentation to find out what works best for us,
Yeah.
because there's lots of books out there, that will give us certain procedure or process to follow, but it might be what worked for the author, but not for us.
Right.
There are some things that are factual that we know around food, like the white wheat acting as an opiate.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what diet you follow, whether you're a carnivore or a vegan or how much you eat of it, it is going to have that effect.
Hmm.
So, so what I'd say is, what would you like in terms of your food? What would you like in terms of your experience? Do you want to feel happier, or do you want to sleep better? Um, do you want more energy, or are you tired of the brain fog in the morning? I think the first thing is to get clear on what your desired result is.
Mm.
And as soon as you get clear on that experience that you want to get to, then do your research.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. And then we'll start talking to people, and you'll find the people who are meant to work with you. That's the way it always goes, doesn't it? Things happen through conversation, through movement, through curiosity.
Yeah, yeah. And sometimes it can happen, can't it? You'll hear that person's name dropped like two or three times, or you see something somewhere and it's like, okay, now I get the message. That's the thing.
Yeah.
That's the thing we need to do right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, before we finish, Sarmado, is there any like last thing you'd love to share with us, or any radical new thought that's come to you today?
Ah, lots talking to you. It's been really good. It's been really good chatting, because you've reminded me about certain elements of this journey, um, that I've been on, because you forget. We all do, don't we? And it's, sitting with you this morning is a reminder to just reconnect, get out there, surround yourself with positive people, inspiring people who've overcome difficulties or challenges and life, and have arrived at this point here now. Because in this place, it just reminds us that the solutions are there as soon as we, the more we connect. um so thank you.
Uh-huh. And thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your experience and your passion. Um, if I make it over to Glastonbury anytime soon, I'm sure to stop by and get some delectable food when I'm walking around the sacred sites.
So cool. You're very welcome. Yeah, be lovely to see you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
For everyone who's listening, if you are inspired by this podcast and you would like to reach out to Sarmado, his contact details are in the links. And if you have a story you would love to share, do be in contact. I would love to hear from you about how this podcast has inspired you and what's happening in your life. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.